Welcome to today's explainer. If you've ever read a biblical text and just felt this certain rhythm, like a distinct pulse right beneath the words that you couldn't quite put your finger on, well, you are definitely not alone. There's this deeply embedded structure in these texts, a really visceral experience that goes way beyond simple rhyming words. Okay, let's dive into this, because today we're unlocking what is essentially the heartbeat of Hebrew poetry. We're going to look at the structural roots that make these ancient texts so captivating, and we'll see how recognizing this hidden framework fundamentally transforms how you read and understand the material. The source material we're looking at beautifully sets the stage with this incredible extended metaphor. It says, "Before the ladder climbs, before the mirror folds, before any pivot turns, there is the root, the quiet, breathing rhythm of Hebrew poetry." And what we're talking about here is an organic, self-similar heartbeat. It's not just some random repetition designed to fill up space on a scroll. No, it is a breathing rhythm where line answers line, right? Idea reflects idea. Thought builds upon thought. When you read these texts, you're literally feeling the pulse of creation's balance remembered, the tension of the fracture acknowledged, and restoration's harmonies singing, all contained right there within the smallest pairs of lines. This rhythm is the literal root from which every grand fractal pattern in the text actually grows. So what's the actual technical name for this heartbeat? It's called Hebrew Parallelism. This is the absolute foundational heartbeat of biblical poetry. And honestly, you've almost certainly felt it before you could even put a name to it. Think about reading a proverb, right? One that pairs wisdom with folly. You intuitively feel the weight of the second half of that sentence reacting to the first half. That's parallelism doing its thing. Because instead of rhyming sounds, which is, what we typically expect in Western poetry, Hebrew poetry rhymes ideas. It deliberately pairs lines of text so they echo, contrast, or build upon one another. Now, to truly train our eyes to see this underlying architecture, we need to break it down into three pieces. There are three primary forms of parallelism that make up this textual root. First up, we have synonymous parallelism. Second, antithetic parallelism, and third, synthetic, which is also sometimes called progressive parallelism. These three mechanics, they are the absolute engine of Hebrew poetry. And by understanding just these three simple forms, a completely new dimension of reading is going to open right up for you. Let's start with the first form, synonymous parallelism. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how in this structure, the second line directly mirrors or restates the first line. Take a look at Psalm 19:1, for example. The first line might make this bold, sweeping declaration, and then the second line immediately answers it by saying essentially the exact same thing, but it uses slightly different imagery or vocabulary to really deepen the emphasis. It's kind of like a musical chord being struck twice, just to make absolutely sure you hear the full resonance. Line 2 echoes line 1, locking the meaning into place and creating this profound sense of balance and harmony. Next up, we have antithetic parallelism. And as the name implies, this one is all about contrast. You see this constantly in the wisdom literature, like in Proverbs 10:1. Here, the structure sets up a really stark, intentional contrast to highlight a fundamental truth. The first line will present one reality, say the behavior of a wise person, and then the second line flips the script entirely, showing the behavior of a foolish person. So it's not echoing anymore, it's directly opposing. The writer uses that tension between the two lines to vividly define the boundaries between right and wrong, wisdom and folly, light and dark. It is energetic, it's punchy, and it is instantly memorable. Let's move to and see how this builds with our third form, synthetic or progressive parallelism. Consider Psalm 1 verses 1 and 2. In this form, the thought doesn't just repeat, and it doesn't just contrast either. Instead, it takes a step forward. The second line takes the idea presented in the first line and expands on it, completes it, or pushes it to a totally new conclusion. It's progressive. It's like a staircase of meaning where every single line elevates the thought higher than the one right before it, giving the text this incredible feeling of forward momentum and growth. So the crucial point is this. These structures aren't just pretty poetry. They're not just clever little literary devices invented to make the text sound nice when somebody reads it aloud. They are deeply, deeply theological. The very grammar and structure of the poetry actually model God's ordered, purposeful design. The form is the message. The way the words are arranged physically reflects the larger truths of the universe being described within those very words. It's mind-blowing when you think about it. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how that theological design works in practice. Notice how each poetic form maps directly to a theological mirror. Synonymous parallelism, where lines balance and agree, mirrors the perfect harmony of creation. Everything's in alignment. Antithetic parallelism, where lines contrast and clash, well, that mirrors the tension of the fracture, the brokenness of a fallen world where things are constantly at odds. And synthetic parallelism, where lines build and move forward, that mirrors the progress of restoration, pushing toward a completed, redeemed future. The macro themes of the entire biblical narrative, creation, fracture, and restoration, are literally encoded into the microscopic grammar of two-line poems. How cool is that? So, why does this root device actually matter for us as readers? Well, first off, because it's the foundation of all biblical fractals. Every massive, overarching theme in the text grows out of these tiny, self-similar roots. Second, it reveals an immense theological beauty that, honestly, you might otherwise just read right past. When you finally realize the structure itself is preaching to you, the whole text just comes alive. And third, it allows us to actively train our fractal eye. We can learn to spot these patterns on the fly, which makes our time engaging with the source material incredibly rich and highly efficient. So I want to break the fourth wall for a second here and talk directly to you. How do you actually train your eye to see this stuff? When you sit down with a passage of biblical poetry, the very first question you need to ask yourself is, do these lines echo, contrast, or build forward? You've got to become an active reader. Don't just let the words wash over you. Look closely at the structural joints. Are you looking at synonymous harmony, antithetic tension, or synthetic progress? Then, once you have successfully identified the pattern, ask the second question. What underlying truth is being reinforced by this specific pattern? If the author chose to deliberately contrast two ideas instead of echoing them, why? What is that tension supposed to make you feel or realize in that moment? You want to look past the mechanical structure and ask how the specific form chosen actively amplifies the meaning of that specific verse. Finally, ask yourself, how does this small pair echo the larger divine fractal rule? Challenge yourself to see the massive big picture inside the smallest details. If you're looking at a verse about wisdom versus foolishness, how does that tiny micro-pattern reflect the macro story of the universe's fracture? Connecting the smallest pair of lines to the absolute largest themes of creation, fracture, and restoration, that is exactly how you master this material. Let's make this highly practical. Here's an exercise straight from our source material that I highly recommend you try today. Just open up to Isaiah chapter 40, verses 28 through 31. Read those verses, but specifically look for that breathing rhythm we've been discussing. Search for the echoing lines. Identify where it contrasts and where it builds. Apply those 3 questions we just went over. You're going to be amazed at how quickly the fractal pattern just jumps right off the page once you actually know what you're looking for. I want to leave you with this final, really provocative thought from our source material to wrap up today's explainer. When you truly grasp the depth of Hebrew parallelism, you realize that, quote, the smallest paired phrases still point to Christ at the center of redemption's pattern. It is just staggering to consider that an entire universe of theology, the entire heartbeat of the redemption story, is woven into the most basic grammatical structures of the text. Keep training that fractal eye. If the very heartbeat of creation is hiding in plain sight within a simple 2-line poem, what other universe-shaping patterns are just waiting for you to discover on the very next page?